It takes a lot for a person to give up on a lifelong hobby and passion. Never once in my life did I ever think that I would be sitting down and telling the internet the incidents that made me quit the most fun, exciting, and overall adrenaline-pumping experience I ever had in my life. I've been cave exploring since I was in middle school. It started out as just another one of those childish teenage dares everyone has experienced in their lives. A few friends and I simply wandered around back and forth in this creepy old coal mine entrance, just a couple of miles away from our school at the time. We didn't find much, but that didn't stop this spark lighting up inside of me. I wanted to do it again. No matter how much my friends had teased and picked on me for it. There was something about the mysterious unknown of caves that intrigued me. I never really understood why some people are so freaked out about them. Until now. The first mishap was several years back. I had packed everything for a seemingly normal trip. A bottle of water, a machete, and a flashlight. A rope as well in case I needed to change elevation. All the usual materials that I needed. If you encounter any monsters, give me a call. My wife would always sarcastically announce before I stepped out the door. My wife didn't share the love of my admittedly dangerous hobby. I didn't blame her. She cheered me on from a distance though. However, I wasn't fond of the idea of taking her with me. If something went wrong, I would rather have only me get hurt, rather than have the both of us go down. I wouldn't be able to deal with that kind of guilt. The drive there already had gave me some strange vibes. I felt like I was being watched the whole time. It really threw me off because I've never had the feeling, even when inside the deepest and darkest of caves, let alone just driving to them. I foolishly brushed it off as me just having an off day at the time, and kept on as if nothing was different at all. And that's how I dealt with a lot of problems. This trip's cave was well over 30 miles away from my house in the beginning of a desert. The place looked even more barren than when I had originally scoped the place out to see if it would be a good fit. The dusty entrance of the cave sat at around 8 feet tall and 10 feet wide. Inside, the natural walkway was pitch black. It's like darkness was pouring out into the rest of the planet from it. That wasn't odd to me though. Most entrances I had come across were usually like that. On either side of the entrance sat an array of rotting cactuses protruding up from the sand. They looked ancient, and almost as if they were on the edge of death. I made my way over, giving the entrance one more firm glance before kneeling down to reach into my backpack to retrieve my machete and flashlight. I stepped inside and began my expedition, letting the darkness engulf me as I marched forward. Immediately, a powerful scent of iron singed my nostrils enough to make my facial expression turn sour. My first assumption of where it came from was the corpse of an animal. The smell was obnoxiously overwhelming. I waved my hand in front of my face in a pointless attempt to waft the stench away. Something definitely died in here, I complained, still pressing forward nonetheless. Turning my flashlight on to see if I could spot the source of the foul odor. I dragged my flashlight beam around the floor, the ceiling, and walls only to see nothing but decent-sized spiderwebs elegantly strung up in the corners, along with centipedes that all retreated back into the cracks of the rock upon being spotted by me. I only went on for about 100 more feet beyond that point, when I was contemplating giving up and either going home, or finding a different location when that same potent stench of iron returned. This time, it was so powerful that I could nearly taste it on my tongue. I pointed my flashlight down at the floor and spotted a long, continuous trail of blood leading to some sort of drop-off 20 feet in front of me. What happened here? I said out loud. I paused, taking a glance over my shoulder to be sure the coast was clear before I followed the blood. The thought going through my mind was that some desert coyote had gotten a hold of some unfortunate prey item and dragged it down here to feast. I stopped where the blood did, pointed my flashlight down what appeared to be about a 10-foot drop into an empty, circular-shaped and eerie expanse. At the bottom of the drop-off was a note. The text itself was a crimson red written in a sloppy formation. The same blood on the floor had been used to create the note. I got out my rope, tying one end around my waist and the other one around a sturdy-looking chunk of rock sticking out from the wall that I had been standing next to. Descending into the small abyss, I immediately looked around and kept my guard up, letting my left hand firmly grip itself around the machete as I picked up the note with my right. Once I had a hold of the paper, I quickly ascended back up and hoisted myself up over the edge of the drop-off. I grabbed my flashlight, pointed it at the note, and began to read with an intrigued smirk. "This is the end for me. I should have listened to everyone. My veins are draining and I don't have much time left. That thing is gonna come back here and finish me off any minute now. It can smell blood, and here I am, drenched in it. To whoever finds this, please bring this message to my family. My wife's name is Anne." The ending of the writing was suddenly cut off. Blood had been smeared messily across the bottom of the paper. I didn't know how to react at first. After all my experience of doing this, nothing had been able to raise my level of paranoia like that note had. You remember that feeling of being watched that I mentioned while driving here? It was increased to tenfold after I had completed reading what was on that piece of paper. I didn't run or book it. Even though it had been a short trip, I decided to pack it up for the day and leave after that. People can be quite loopy in their final moments. I chalked up the thing he was talking about to a desert coyote or something like that. That's what it had to be. Poor guy. I huffed as I exited the cave. I left the note behind, however. Most might call me an idiot for doing so, but for me personally, it would have felt disrespectful to take something from his grave, despite the lack of an actual body being down there. When I got home that night, my wife could tell that something was up with me, and continuously probed to get to the bottom of why I was so quiet that evening. I just told her that I got chased by a couple of desert coyotes, and it spooked me pretty hard. The look on her face in response told me that she was having trouble buying that answer, but refused to keep digging. I silently thanked her in the back of my head. Talking about it so soon wasn't possible with all the questions I had running through my head. The next and final incident had taken place about 2 years after the first, by which point I had nearly forgotten about the thing with the note. I never ended up telling my wife, even though I had planned to at some point, but I was glad I didn't. The last thing I needed was to freak her out. The cave that I had discovered this time around was more along the lines of a strange, circular hole in the ground. As far as the entrance anyway, the hole was a near perfect circle, with a spiral staircase artificially carved out of the rock, leading downwards into the intimidating darkness. I followed my usual routine, made a quick trip back to my car, grabbed my equipment and returned back to the entrance of the cave as my typical excitement began to rev up. Small chunks of rock were dislodged and fell down into the middle as I slowly treaded down the stone staircase. There was a certain unusual warmth to it as my feet made contact with the rock. The descent itself only took less than a minute. The harder part was figuring out which tunnel to go down once I got to the bottom. There were 2 of them, each with an oddly distinct feature that seemed a little weird at first. The one on the left was a more smooth, rectangular shape. It looked like it had been artificially dug and carved, just as the makeshift staircase had been. Lining the walls of the tunnel were drawings in what appeared to be generic white chalk. No, not any satanic symbols or anything, but drawings of just ordinary people, it seemed like. It depicted neighborhoods, cities, and even small towns, along with people occupying them and performing everyday activities like biking, walking, and even driving cars. The tunnel on the right was much more jagged and naturally occurring in its appearance. That's what I naively assumed anyway. The only thing that seemed off was a small trail of crumbs, more than likely from some sort of bread. I ended up choosing the tunnel on the left and began my journey down it, taking in all the sights of the white chalk drawings. They became even more dense the further down I went. A good chunk of them were even spread across the ground and ceiling. The genuine detail and creativity of it all impressed me. I was desperately eager to find the group or person responsible for it. After what had been a few more minutes of walking down the tunnel, I had seemingly come to the end when a multitude of small balls of light pierced through the thick darkness. They were in a rectangular formation similar to the shape of the tunnel itself. I unsheathed my machete, in case whatever was ahead ended up being a threat. The tunnel opened up into a much larger area. It was a room, a massive one at that. Inside the expanse sat multiple torches on the walls. On the ground, level to my feet, were multiple rows of chairs that sat facing an altar towards the back. It showed its age, being covered in dust, cobwebs, and small pieces of pebbles that had been dislodged from the ceiling above. I spotted another tunnel right behind the altar, and just as I was about to move towards the altar, a friendly voice had stopped me right in my place. "Could it be?" he pleaded excitedly. "Do we have a new ration?" Ration, I thought. What the hell does that mean? I turned to face the figure speaking. He was an older man, probably nearly in his mid-60s. His age and lack of hygiene were on full display, as his cheeks and upper neck were covered in rugged stubble. His fingernails were dirtier than the bottom of most people's beds, and his wrinkles were so noticeable, I thought he might have been a burn victim. He wore a torn-up white robe that had clearly seen better days. "Hey there," I replied, hiding the fact that I was a little startled on the inside. "I was just looking around. I didn't mean to interrupt or intrude on anything." No, that's nonsense. Come have a seat. Our session will begin soon." He directed me towards one of the chairs, motioning me with his unwashed hands. "Well, actually, I was busy exploring and was just leaving," I told him, much to his disappointment. "Say, how long have you been down here anyway?" "Oh, it's been quite some time," the old man chuckled. "My brothers and I see this as our sanctuary. We are forbidden to return to what's up there. It goes against our law." I lifted an eyebrow, now becoming puzzled. "How do you get food and water? Doesn't it get scary being down here all the time?" The man stopped, his gaze now focused near my feet. He maintained a smile as he slowly lifted his eyes, as if he were sizing me up. "Well, our food comes to us," he pronounced slowly. His tone became less inviting than before. I could feel myself tense up as he kept staring at me. I took one step back, keeping my hand tightened around my machete. "You said you have brothers, right?" I asked, attempting to kill the eerie silence. The man didn't answer at first. He simply stepped forward and placed his arms behind his back, slightly blocking the way that I had come in. "Yes, we are very fond of one another. Family must always stick together. Would you like to meet them, perhaps?" I really need to go." The man cut me off before I was able to finish my sentence. His unsettling stare had not left in the slightest as he looked at me. "I insist you stay," he continued. No, man, I'm serious. I really can't. I'm busy," I pleaded, struggling to hide the fear in my tone. "We've been very, very hungry," he said. The evil in his voice made my legs tremble and my blood run cold as I stood in place. "Wouldn't you like to feed us?" he continued. "Please step away from me. I mean it," I shot back. "Oh, trust me. This will be fun. You just have to see, that's all." His voice had deepened far beyond his initial introduction. He slowly took footsteps toward me, and I watched as his eyes began to whiten, all the color retreating from them as he approached closer. "Get the hell away from me," I demanded, raising my machete to face level. The man didn't stop. He seemed completely unbothered and kept coming with that same horrendous smile on his face. "My brothers and I will enjoy you." I lunged at the man and slashed with my machete, cutting him in the shoulder and causing him to erupt violently with a deeply unsettling scream, which echoed loudly through the cave. Blood had splattered and poured onto the ground from his deep gash. I stood over the old man as he collapsed on his back and continued screaming in agony. But through his wails, I could hear the sounds of footsteps coming from the tunnel behind the altar. They were fast, angry, and impossibly forceful. There had to be at least 10 to 12 different sets of feet running on the ground in my direction. They were coming for me. His brothers, I thought, causing my heart to sink into my stomach. The man looked back up at me in his wounded state. Blood leaked out of his mouth and covered his bottom lip as he spoke. "They heard you. They all know you're here and they're coming." He laughed maniacally. I immediately turned and began to run back down the tunnel that I'd come through, jumping over the old man and leaving him behind. As these sounds of him getting mercilessly trampled by my pursuers filled the walls of the cave. They themselves made no noise, no chants, no screams or battle cries. I only heard the sounds of their footsteps. Somehow that was much worse. I pumped my legs with everything that I had. The light of the entrance was like a holy grail to my eyes as I frantically sprinted towards it, not even taking the chance to look back at the beings chasing me. I bursted out into the bottom of the entrance and leaped up the first couple of stone stairs and almost tripped in the process, which would have been my inevitable doom if I hadn't regained my balance with lightning speed and threw myself towards the top. The sounds of the footsteps faded as I peered back down into the hole. I didn't see any of the other brothers chasing me. Thank God, I thought. I dashed over to my car and launched myself inside, put the keys in the ignition and started it up, still looking out the windshield to see if they had decided to follow me to the surface and surprise me. The coast was clear. That's how it seemed. But that didn't stop me from flooring it down the highway and all the way back home. My hands shook on the steering wheel the entire way back that day. I had never been that afraid in my life. This time, I had told my wife what had happened. There was no way I could have kept that bottled up. She had insisted I call the police, to which I obliged after a certain amount of nagging. I wish you all could have seen the look on the chief's face when they had gone to the spot and found nothing. Even the entrance itself was non-existent. Nothing but a patch of grass, as if the cave itself had never been there in the first place. Please take these experiences as a warning. If you're gonna do something dangerous, never do it alone. Always have some sort of backup plan in case things go wrong. You never know what's out there watching and waiting for you.